Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now here's your host, Roxanne Derhodge.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Derhodge. Thanks for tuning in with Authentic Living with Roxanne this week. Today I have a special, I would say soon to be friend because I've just met her, Patti Hanrath. She is a leadership and success coach, and we were recently introduced by a very dear friend, Penny Tremblay. And as for other people that have listened to the podcast, she does conflict resolution, playing nice in the sandbox. And she was thought that Patti and I were in some synergy, and I've been invited. Patti's doing a summit, which I'd love for all of you to look at the show notes because there'll be a link to the summit, and that's on April 26th to May 7th, where you can listen to myself and lots of experts in leadership. So Patti, thanks so much for coming in today to be on the podcast.
Roxanne, I'm truly honored to be here with you, and just am looking forward to spending a bit of time sharing with your audience today.
Awesome. So obviously you're doing, you've been in this field for a long time, and I know your story is quite fascinating, and I love, when you told me offline, but just kind of tell us about your path and kind of what inspires you today to do what you do and to obviously, accomplish a bigger goal like running a summit.
Sure, I'm happy to. I'll just do a little bit of a backstory just very quickly. I spent over 20 years in the banking industry, managing customer service in Ontario, and married my current husband, Joe, 19 years ago, which I had concluded my time with the bank when I married Joe and moved to Northern Ontario. And at that point in time, Joe ran his own construction company, building homes and cottages, et cetera. So I kind of took on the role of administration and dealing with customers and stuff like that. But I'll be honest, construction was not my passion. And when we became empty nesters, I knew it was time for me to really look into, okay, I'm in my 50s now, and what do I want to do with the rest of my life? Kind of like, what do I want to be when I really grow up, right? And so I went on a journey of discovery and finally ended up deciding that building my own coaching practice was really what I was passionate about. And I became a certified coach in August of 2012. Which I was absolutely loving. And then in August 2015, my life took a huge change in trajectory along with Joe when he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at the age of 53. So that obviously was a shock. And I'll be honest though, like, as I like to say, once I kind of picked myself up off the floor, as being a coach, I decided very quickly, I knew the power of goals, and I decided very quickly to set myself 2 goals. And my number 1 goal was to always ensure that Joe had the best care possible, knowing that would not always be me. And number 2 was, my goal was to not go down with the ship. And certainly no disrespect to my husband, but I knew the rate of caregiver burnout and or early death was extremely high. So those were kind of the 2 goals that I set that really became my anchors to go through this journey. I'd never really been around anybody with Alzheimer's. I knew, basic information, but I really didn't know what the journey was going to look like. And I just wanted to do the best that I possibly could to thrive through this and not just survive. And I'll be honest, I've learned that thrive has a different meaning for everybody. And so that kind of set me on my journey, and it's obviously been a very tumultuous one. Joe's been in long-term care now for a year and a half. And when the pandemic hit, everything went into lockdown, and I went 374 days without being able to get in to see Joe. So thankfully, I just got in to see him about 4 weeks ago. And I'm just truly blessed to be able to get in and sit there with him. Obviously, there's been a lot of change, and we had a lot of FaceTime throughout that time. I was FaceTiming regularly throughout the week, and some window visits, but it's just not the same as sitting there and holding his hand and just being present with him.
So let's talk about, okay, you're young and you're dealing with this situation, and I think developmentally, most of us will accept that as we get older, things will happen, and maybe it's not going to be that sudden, where all of a sudden you're having to deal with an issue like Alzheimer's. What happened for you when you realized, like you said, I'm goal driven and I'm going to figure this out? But I'm going to say that prior to that, there must have been a gap where you must have been going through a lot of things in grieving what was and what was to be.
Well, that's an interesting thought, Roxanne. I'll be honest, the grieving didn't start for me right away. I kind of, because I'm a get things done kind of person, I just kind of went into the mode of what are the steps that I'm going to need to look at. I'll absolutely speak into the grieving because it came just a little bit later for me. I went into the mode of what are the steps that I'm going to have to potentially look at walking through. And, to be honest, what it came to, Joe being a builder had, he'd built us a beautiful home on 14 acres in the country. And, this was our dream home. This was our dream. And we had so many dreams that we were, looking forward to doing together. We wanted to do some work in third world countries and, stuff like that. So honestly, one of the first processes that I had to walk through, or I chose to walk through, I didn't have to, all of this is choices, obviously, but what I chose to walk through was honestly starting to let go of the dreams that Joe and I had together and starting to reformulate. And this didn't happen like immediately. This was a little bit into the journey. But that was one of the big processes that I went through in the beginning, was just working through that, all those dreams that we had as a couple together were not going to come to fruition. And I had to work on coming to that reality. So that in essence is a grieving process, because
absolutely it is. It's maybe
right?
maybe the term, because generally we think grief as, loss in the traditional sense, but from an emotional lens, to some degree, you were grieving because now here's all these dreams and goals and this beautiful home and maybe the things you were going to do, and you were going to go to, like you said, different third world countries, and now that door is kind of shutting right before your eyes.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
exactly. So it definitely was a grieving process, just, as you say, it a little different than maybe the traditional sense, because there was all this loss that, I was experiencing and going through of what was not going to be anymore. You spend your whole life quite often thinking about, and it wasn't even retirement for us. It was just how we wanted to live our life in later years when our kids were out on their own and doing their own thing. And it was just the two of us. And that was no longer a possibility. So there absolutely was a grieving process in that. And there's been many different grieving. It's an ongoing grieving process. Right. As I quite often say to people, the way just because I work in pictures best, if I were to look at Joe as a puzzle, I'm watching a piece of the puzzle fall away, bit by bit as we're walking this journey. And so it is an ongoing grieving process. And as you well know in, your field and what you do, grief just shows up. It just shows up unexpectedly. It's not like, okay, today I'm free and I can grieve today. I could be in the middle of getting ready to do a podcast with somebody like you and grief shows up.
I'll say that it doesn't have any time. It doesn't
Yeah.
have any channel. And I've also gone through a significant loss. I lost my youngest sister. It's going to be 5 years ago. And yeah, and then it's all of a sudden it's, like a thought within a thought based on a picture or a song or
Yeah.
something. And then before you know, you're flooded up and you're like, you're in your car and thinking, wow, where did this just come from?
Yeah.
So I don't think there's ever, a beginning, middle, and end, especially when you're dealing with something kind of chronic. If it's acute, that's a different kind of situation. But when it's kind of, you're looking at a Joe right before your eyes, and then potentially you're saying, wow, that capacity just got shifted. That experience I'll never have again. That maybe that conversation may never happen again. So that's, so microscopic, which a lot of, caregivers talk about. It's almost like they're grieving, but the person's still alive.
Yes.
And, and then they go through the process. So by the time some individuals, and I think Deborah Bakhti, I mentioned to you, at the end, she said, there was so much grieving while her husband was alive, but at the time she had passed, she had done a lot of grieving. It was a different kind of grief at the end.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because, just on this vein, and then, I'll switch into some of the things that I've been doing to really help me personally walk through this and get to the point of taking a big leap of putting on this summit. But I've noticed since I've been able to get back in to see Joe, obviously a big change in him, but just so relishing in the little things that I still can share with him, whether it's a little smile or, he chuckles at something and, he gets the odd word out that still makes sense. And just, things that I never thought of in my life before that I would be so grateful for and just relish, like you might a beautiful sunset that you just can't explain. Those are the things that I'm really grateful for and noticing now that I may have missed before walking this journey.
And I think in this time, most of us have been experiencing that, but you've probably got it at maybe a deeper, like 374 days, which there's been progression. Obviously, there's been shifts within you, but also with him, his disease has progressed as well. But I know, like with all of us within the pandemic, the things that we are now connecting with compared to, at least I can speak to myself, I can't say for everyone, but even from the experiences I've heard people talk about, like, I'm back onto the woods where I am, and quite literally the birds that I see, or even when I go for my walks, the things that I notice now that I've done that, I've lived in this home for like 25 years. I hadn't really had the depth of experience before. So I think, I'm sure most people listening can relate to some degree.
That's some of the benefits of coming out of this is, our presence and our awareness for a lot of people has really been heightened. And that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Out of adversity, what are the positives that are coming? So let's talk a little bit about you and your role. Like you said, you kind of thought, what am I going to do when I grow up? But how did you, I'm going to assume you brought some of that with you into what you did, into your practice of coaching. And now you're getting to the point where you're doing this big initiative of a summit. So tell us kind of what parts of that you brought to the coaching, or how you kind of looked at things maybe differently, or maybe not differently. Maybe you focused a bit more. What has been your experience?
Well, my experience has been, I'm so grateful for the year and a half I had in my coaching practice prior to Joe becoming ill, because I was very focused on learning and implementing and really helping my clients create transformations in their life. So, because I'd taken in and done as much learning as I had up until that point, and I believe I was really a coach by heart, even back in my banking days when I was leading teams with customer service. I'm, in hindsight now, I coached a lot of people and didn't put the term coaching on it because we didn't know that much about, or I didn't know that much about coaching back then, and to be able to quote unquote put a label on it. But, you know, my coaching background has really enabled me to, you know, kind of self-coach myself sometimes throughout this. And I think, you know, as people listening to your podcast, I think that's something that we maybe don't put enough emphasis on, about how much we really can, you know, dig into things ourselves and not always rely on external sources. Those external sources are critical and a big part, but, you know, just the amount that we can really do for ourselves as well when we learn some of the tools. One of the things that I noticed very quickly in the journey with Joe was that the people that I would say were in our inner circle and part of our support system coming into that, I was very quickly realizing, well, not very quickly, but, you know, over the course of a year or 18 months, starting to realize that they weren't necessarily going to be the same people that were going to travel the journey with us as our inner circle. So I'm big on teaching about the power of your inner circle and very intentionally selecting those people, and giving yourself a criteria, like what are your needs that need to be met? What are your values? What do you want to be in alignment with? And this was, you know, when I was looking at selecting my inner circle, I wasn't looking at it as a one-way street that they were just going to pour into me. I was looking for a very small, intimate group of women that we were going to, that we shared values, we shared dreams, we shared purpose, we shared, you know, all the things that were important to us in life. We were, you know, kind of in the same wavelength, so that we could be a support system for each other. We could lift each other up. We could be there and be super compassionate when somebody was really having a difficult time. And I don't mean to say this in the past, because it's still going on. It's just grown to be such an integral part of my life. You know, there's probably 4 women that I would say that I've developed these relationships with. And I honestly, with the 4 of them, I literally could call them at any time of the night or day, and just know that that support system is there, and they could do the same thing with me. So developing that inner circle has been integral. But again, you know, I just want to reiterate the importance of, you know, making sure that these people are in alignment with you, where you're going, your dreams, your values, your needs, those core essences of who you are and what really matters to you.
And I would think, Patti, that, and I know what, you know, with myself, with my life, making major changes, that prior to going through anything difficult, I was the one that was there on a deeper level based on what I did. And I think, you know, what was helpful, I think my friends were waiting to see what I was going to do, because I was always the one to extend and be available, but I had not really been through anything significant. And like with myself, I went through a lot of change 10 years ago, and then wrote my book and you know, but my book was based on my endings. So it's interesting you're talking about endings. And I think what has started to happen for me is that people in my life start to say, okay, let's see what she's going to do. And I was, you know, overwhelmed, because then I said, I need. And they were like, okay, well, it's about time, you know, because we've been here and you've been supportive and you've been kind and you've been gentle and you've been authentic. And, you know, what can we do? And it's interesting. And people that I thought would have been there when I reached out, that I think had a perception of me of being a certain way, they couldn't deal with my vulnerability and my need at that point. So to your point, I think that's so valuable, having lived it as well, is to really, that values alignment is so key. And sometimes I say the universe says, okay, you know, reason, season, a lifetime. I don't know if you've ever heard that. And that's what started to happen. Then the core people that were there for me when I was having the toughest time is still the core knit people that exist in my life today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that was, you know, and I just want to point out, no disrespect to the people that were in my life before. They're still in my life, but they're in my life in a different way, right? And they'll always be a part of my life. Some of them are very dear friends, but they weren't the people that I knew were going to be that inner circle support system. But you know, everybody's on their own journey and everybody's trying to figure life out, and everybody's got their own stuff going on. And, you know,
Absolutely.
right. And that's part of, you know, to flip into momentarily about what kind of really has spurred me on to do this summit. You know, it's the summit is called Professional Women Rising, and it's a masterclass series to go from I know there's more to life to living fully and boldly. And that in essence is based on my journey. Like, you know, as I was mentioning earlier, I didn't want to just survive this. To me, survival is the I hate to use this term, but I don't know what else to use, the lowest level of just above not surviving.
Just above the line. And that would,
Just above
that,
the
yeah,
line.
exactly. You wanted to thrive in it. And I think, you know, it's so interesting, and I'm sure I'm going to be fascinating to listen to all the other speakers, and I'm going to also share my story. But yeah, when you're, you know, at first you're like, okay, well, I'm getting up, I'm getting dressed, I'm doing all these things. And then you start to realize as you wade through things that is very painful at times, that there's another side. I often say, you can get the guidance, like you said, and I would say to people, and you know, even my coaching or speaking, but sometimes you have to go through that tunnel that's awfully dark by yourself, knowing that there's going to be light on the other end. So you can't take everybody with you all the time. You
Yes.
need that support, but at some point you got to walk on your
Yeah,
own.
absolutely.
And with myself, I can say that it was the best thing that happened to me, even though it was at the time, it was quite difficult on me. But now I look at, you know, 10 years later and the kind of life that I've created for myself, and the things that I've done. And, you know, I'm just so grateful, you know, day in, day out for everything that has happened, even though it meant a massive ending.
Yeah,
There were valuable lessons that through that tunnel, you know,
absolutely. I
and
so agree. I've got a little sign right beside my laptop here that says Joe is my reason and not my excuse. And I think so many people, and again, not to minimize what anybody is going through. You know, there's varying degrees of what we're all going through, and whatever it is you're going through, it's real for you and it's your journey, and I honor that and I respect that. You know, but what happened with me was, you know, after Joe had been, you know, after he had moved into long-term care, that was in August of 2019. So I spent kind of that fall and winter kind of really working on me, going through the tunnel, rebuilding some dreams, like starting to dream again. Like, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want to do moving forward? And I felt like I was just really getting a handle on that when the pandemic hit, right?
yeah.
And I mean, that was another whole situation. I believe in being very transparent with my audiences. You know, that really set me back for 2 or 3 months. Like it was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how, I thought I'd been through the worst of the worst, or was going through the worst of the worst when the pandemic hit. But, you know, again, reality, sooner or later, we have to face it and choose. This is a big part of what I work on with my clients is, you know, we have way more choices in life than what we quite often think we do. So I still had the choice of, you know, facing the reality of the situation we were in. We were all globally in, but how was I as a person going to maneuver this? And you talked earlier about, you know, people when you first got vulnerable and whatever, people watching you. And it's interesting because I had that same revelation at the beginning of the journey with Joe, that my kids are going to be watching. My grandkids are going to be watching. My friends are going to be watching. People are going to watch how I choose to navigate this. And, you know, certainly not to put myself on a pedestal, but I can be a person that they can look to as to how to authentically maneuver through traumatic times like that, or difficult times like that. The ups and the downs, because that's the reality of life. We're all experiencing the ups and the downs, but, you know, choosing to get back up again and dust yourself off and keep going. That's the point that I got to, you know, 3 or 4 months into the pandemic was, okay, here I am again.
Now
right?
that I'm getting back up and I'm dusting myself a little off. But I think you know, what I love about what you're saying is that oftentimes we see the person on when they've already risen already. We don't see the messy steps, and most people, potentially, I can't say everybody, aren't willing to share how tough some of those times were in between. And because I would say, the average one they would say to me, "Hey, Roxanne, I see you on a stage. I see you, doing all these things, but what's the backstory? Like,
Right.
you went through all this tough time, and then got a severance package. You got assaulted by a complete stranger on the street. You went through all that. You had a corporate career. Then your marriage ended. Then you wrote a book. Okay, well, okay, back up. Let's rewind.
It's not making sense, right?
Okay, you glossed over some stuff there because people want to know when you are, and I'm interested in when you're down, what are you doing? What are you doing? Because it's not so pretty sometimes.
Yeah.
When you're at that spot, and what are some of the core fundamental things that you would have done, Patti? And I'm sure at times you've gone through it, even when we went through the pandemic. What was some of the things that you were just doing for yourself? I know you shared some of it with me when we were, on your podcast. But what did you do, or what do you continue to do as some staples for taking those steps?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's been an ongoing learning process for me because, this is a different journey. But one of the first things I learned to do was to say no without feeling bad about it. I was very involved in the community. I sat on, I was on a couple of board of directors. I was involved in different organizations and stuff like that. And, as the journey progressed, there was only so much of me to go around. And I knew that I came to the revelation that I couldn't do it all, right? And, so I had to start to pick and choose what my real priorities were with me at that time. Mm-hmm. And I want to emphasize at that time, because that doesn't mean that, so I came off the boards. I disengaged from some of the community things that I was involved in. For my own self-preservation, I knew that, or I was discovering how much more I was going to have to pour into me than I was used to pouring into other people. So that was a huge mind shift. You alluded to this earlier about how we give and we give and we do. But I knew that in order to not go down with the ship, which was one of my goals and one of my anchors, which I kept coming back to, that I was going to have to start pouring into me a whole lot more, guilt-free. And that's what I want to really emphasize, is being able to do that guilt-free. We cannot give what we do not have. We've all heard you can't give from an empty cup. And I just really started to focus on, what do I need to do for me to continuously fill my cup? And I actually, even at one point, got to the point where I was thinking, what if I could fill my cup so full that there was overflow and I could give from the overflow? And that was honestly such a mind shift for me. I haven't really mastered that yet. There's been a lot going on, but it's something that I continue to think about. Like, what if we could fill our cup so full that it was overflowing and we could give from the overflow? We would never be giving from depletion. I just think
that's such, it's so amazing that you say that, because my son, I remember, these pivotal little moments, right? When you're thinking, I like you, I'm quite resilient. And so I launched my book 6 years ago, and at my launch, my son spoke. And at that time, goodness, he was 14. And the night before, he's trying to read the acknowledgements, and his voice is shaky. And I'm like, sweetheart, you can do it. You can do it. And then he got up on the podium. He was lovely. He read the acknowledgements, and he was, he sat up there with me. And then on the way home in the car, he said to me, Mommy, I want to let you know this was the best night of my life.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, did Grandma tell you to do that? Did Grandpa, who directed you? He goes, Mom, this is all me. Right? But again, like when you say, people look at you, right? And to see, and really for him, he was my main, one of my main anchors to get through this time. And when he said that, I said, I don't care if this book ever does anything or if I do much with it. That made the moment for me, because I was trying to teach other women that we all replicate things that are sometimes not functional for you, but this is the path through it. As a psychotherapist, I analyze my own book myself.
Right.
And when RJ said that to me, I was just, that was it for me. I was, overwhelmed with emotion that I had impacted one of the most important people in my life. It all so worth it, with lots of hard work and all those things, and
such a beautiful thing, right? Such a beautiful thing. And the reality is we don't really know who all is watching our journey. I've been very transparent through my personal page on Facebook about I call it my AZ journey. And, after the amount of time that I've been posting periodically about that, the people that, and I am not doing it to get any accolades. I'm doing it to raise awareness of the situation and what the reality of the situation really looks like. But the impact, the ripple effect is happening, right? And when we choose to walk our journey the best that we can possibly walk it, it will have that. It's, well, good, bad, or ugly, it's going to have a ripple effect. So when we choose to walk it as best we possibly can, we can have the kind of impact that we really want to have. And that kind of leads me into something else that kind of popped into my mind that I'd like to share just briefly, is about comparison. Because comparison is something else that I really had to work on not getting caught up in, because I'm finding myself in a situation where I'm, doing less and less with my work through this journey. And my friends and colleagues are like, rising, professional women rising, they're doing the rising piece. And I was having to do the step back and, not do some of the achievements that I was looking forward to, and make some of those difficult choices. But when I, part of the mindset that I had to really work on, and I'm in the midst of doing my neuro coaching certification so that I can just bring my clients to a whole another level with their transformation and my own personal transformation, but what I came to realize was, I'm running my own race. I'm walking my own journey. I'm desiring and choosing to be authentically me. And I want to be the best me that I can possibly be. And that doesn't mean looking at somebody else and wishing I could be doing that, but looking at somebody else and cheering them on and being authentically happy and supportive for what they're achieving. I think there's so much, like bullying and all that kind of stuff out there, that if we can really focus on walking our own journey and being the best that we can possibly be, then there's so much room to really be that cheerleader, be that encourager, genuinely be happy for other people when they reach successes or, whatever they're doing and whatever.
In whatever way. But I think let's talk a little bit about, culturalization of women. And, we're the nurturers, developmentally, we're supposed to go through certain things. And, and then you get to the point, and then a lot of the women, and again, my stage and change was around 44. And, all of a sudden, you've done the schooling, you've met the husband, you've got the home, you've got the career, you got the child or children. And then it's like, okay, now what?
Absolutely.
Right. So if your values aren't in alignment, which is what happened with me at that stage, and I kept compartmentalizing. I kept thinking, all these parts of my life were good, and then there was one that wasn't. So I'd shove it away. Until there was no negotiating. It was like, hello world, here you go. Hello Roxanne, are you there? And then I had to wake up and live it. But a lot of little girls, and not that little boys don't learn it as much, but we know there's such a difference in the way we acculturate children. A lot of women forego the things that you're talking about, which is listening to what they really need to do because of their roles. And, what have you found with some of the women that you've been coaching? And does that make sense that a lot of them sometimes maybe potentially put some of the things that they need on the back burner?
So much. That makes so much sense, Roxanne. And that's exactly a great segue into that's where my summit came from.
Mhm.
Like, there's what I'm seeing in my coaching practice is there's so many women that, they have all the exterior. They've achieved all the stuff. They've achieved all the exterior stuff, but there's this inner knowing, there's this inner nudge that's, maybe not constantly, but it's popping up periodically going like, is this it? Have I arrived? Is this all there is? Like, what I have is great, but I'm not feeling fulfilled personally. I don't
Right.
feel like at my core essence, I'm living authentically me and my life. And that's, that's exactly where the idea for this summit came from, a masterclass series to go from I know there's more to life to living fully and boldly. So, my whole goal with the summit, and I invite each and every one of you, this is a free summit, and there is 21 incredible, amazing international speakers that are pouring their heart and soul into you about how they've maneuvered through this, sharing their story and their tips and whatever, and how to do this. So I'm so excited about it. But that's where it came from, because, I was at that point, and I see that a lot in my clients, that they have all the exterior successes or, have had multiple achievements, but there's still that there's something that's going like, there's got to be more. There's got to be more. There's still something missing because they've given so many of those pieces of themselves away to others.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't poured into maybe even figuring out, like, what are my core values? What are my core needs? Like, what really matters to me? And that's something that I work on a lot with my clients is, discovering what that is and, creating the life that they really want built around those. Because when we create the life built around what really matters to us, what our values are, what our needs are, and the things that, we know in our hearts what really matters to us if we spend the time really digging into that. And if we can live our life from that place, not striving from it or for it, but living from that place, then it doesn't really matter so much about all the other accolades or all the other achievements, because we're living from that fulfillment, which is, I believe one of the reasons that we're here on this earth is to live the best life possible that we can, and grow into the best version of ourselves that we possibly can, so that we can be the person to give our best.
And I think it's almost like a metamorphic shift that all of us go through. But sometimes with women, maybe men do it in a different way because they don't have some of the constraints. But it's almost like you get to this calling that says, whether it's a shift at home, or it's a shift at work, or it's a shift in community. I'm not, I don't think everybody's going to go off and maybe potentially, change everything about their life. But sometimes it's the internal tweakings, because you're getting the beckoning throughout. It's like, I don't know about over here, or what about this, or those cues are constantly around you. And the same with me when I coach people. It's like, how are you, if you could listen to that deep down voice, what would that voice say back to you?
Yes.
Right. And I think sounds like that's what the summit is going to share, all these fantastic stories and all these amazing women. And I look forward to being able to hear all the things that these amazing speakers will share. So Patti, for anyone that is wanting to connect with you, learn more about you, we will be putting the link for the summit in the podcast notes. Is where can people reach you, and any last words before I let you go?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll be honest, I'm in the midst of doing a transition between two websites. So what I'm going to share is my email. If there's something that's connecting with you that resonates with you and you would like to just reach out and have a chat or connect in some way, my email is Patti, Patti, at kinergyleadership.com, and that's KINERGY leadership.com. That website is still up, and it'll give you some insight to me, but there's a whole shift going on in my life, so I'm in the midst of some transition with that. But some final words, I just really encourage you, I feel we've had a real opportunity in the last year in the pandemic to slow down. And the final words that I kind of want to leave everybody with is to honor that slow down and intentionally slow down so that we can speed up. Because until we get slow and quiet and just be and have that time with ourselves to really get to know ourselves and start to dig into what really does matter to me. What difference do I really want to make in this world? And it doesn't have to be big and mammoth and thousands of people. It can be like, I want to be the best mom that I possibly can be, or whatever that is for you. It all matters. You matter and it all matters. So, taking that time to slow down, to really dig into what matters to you, and think about just get your dreaming hat on, throw all the inhibitions away. And if I could really dream about the life that I want to live, what would that really look like? And don't worry about the hows at this point in time. Just focus on what would that look like? What would it feel like? What would it look like? What would I hear? What would I smell? What would I taste? Use all your senses to really get in that. I love to use the analogy of you have to pull an arrow back to be able to let it go to the bullseye. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here, taking that time for yourself, that little step back to really dig into what matters to you so that you can really design the life that you want to live and work through starting to make that happen for you.
Patti, thanks so much for your time. I'm sure everyone listening has gained so much today. And please sign in and sign up for the summit. I am one of the speakers, and with additional 19, 20 other amazing women. And for anyone that's wanting to know more about authentic relationships, either at home or at work, you can reach me at roxannedurhodge.com.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannedurhodge.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.